Hey there, it's author and attorney Kelly O'Connell with Knockout Radio. I have eclectic interests and always enjoy politics, current events, religion, sports, and weird news. Tonight's story, by the way, and I'm putting in a little gospel backing track because of the depressing nature of this topic, is workplace COVID laws. I had a friend of mine, a female, Olivia, asked me to do an article on this just to kind of flesh it out. So here it is. And anyway, I hope you enjoy it. All right. This brief article is meant to cover the basics of current COVID law on vaccinations without comment or judgment, which I'm sure I will anyway. Throw some stuff in there. There is currently great skepticism of the government's COVID policies and intentions regarding the observations of many of the apparent misuses of the virus, which many argue is ongoing. Nevertheless, here's the law as it currently stands. Now, you'll be interested to find out, and I'd love to know what you thought of Joe Biden, of Nancy Pelosi, of even Kamala Harris or whatever. These people, and especially Cuomo and Whitmer, and if you want to throw in on DeSantis, but also the knucklehead Newsom in California, what your opinion of their reactions is. All right, let me go through some questions for you. Can I be forced to take the COVID vaccine? And you're going to be amazed. At the end of May, they made this official. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, announced companies can require employees to get a COVID-19 vaccine, stating federal EEO laws do not prevent an employer from requiring all employees physically entering the workplace to be vaccinated for COVID-19. Federal EEO laws do not prevent an employer from requiring all employees physically entering the workplace to be vaccinated. In other words, they can tell you to be vaccinated. So long as employers comply with the reasonable accommodation provision of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64, and other considerations. Now, this actually agrees with previous court rulings. For example, in Jacobson v. Massachusetts, 197 U.S. 11, 1905, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, agreed that Massachusetts law requiring vaccinations against communicable diseases was legal, stating in part, I just cut a little part of the holding out, the liberty secured by the Constitution of the U.S. does not import or bring in an absolute right in each person to be at all times and in all circumstances wholly freed from restraint. In other words, the law sometimes tells us what to do. It is within the police power of a state to enact a compulsory vaccination law, and it is for the legislature and not for the courts to determine in the first instance whether vaccination is or is not the best mode for the prevention of smallpox and the protection of the public health. So then it was smallpox. But let me just throw this out to you. And I had stated in my last article, I'm not opposed to vaccines. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But a few things you should notice here. Number one, there's a time for vaccinations and even mandatory vaccination, which implies there's a time when there shouldn't be a mandatory vaccination. That's what we have to figure out here. The second part of this is that it says it's the legislature. And the legislature, not the courts, should be making these decisions. That's the will of the people. That's the informed will of the people. And America has gotten into the habit of adjudicating or legislating in courts, which means that number one, the people don't get to speak. It's just a small group of judges. And number two, it means that there's an eternal fight because it never went through the legislative branch. And my chief example of that is abortion, which is being legislated, or pardon me, it's being brought in front of the court now, and we may get rid of Roe v. Wade. And I've got to tell you, there's something like 150, 170 million babies that have been aborted. And we look at China and we say to China, man, you're intimidating. You've got so many more people than we do. So the idea that women had to have abortions, that it was their right, it was nobody else's business, and that the baby didn't have any rights is ridiculous, I think, logically. But in any event, vaccinations, are there any exceptions? Okay, number one, if you're a doubter, if you're an anti-vaxxer, which I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not laughing at you, I'm not scorning you, it's just that I don't know all of the details about the failure of the vaxes or the danger. And I am informed on the libertarian argument that people have a right to make their own healthcare decisions. But I think it is balanced. Of course, it's balanced by the common good. So take that as with a grain of salt. Now, doubting the effectiveness of vaccines or fearing their safety is not a defense against inoculation under the law. You must get the shot unless you can't be vaccinated for reasons of disability, health condition, religious beliefs. And now the EEOC has stated on its website, as with any employment policy, employers that have a vaccine requirement may need to respond to allegations that the requirement has a disparate impact on or disproportionately excludes employees based on their race, their color, religion, sex, national origin. Employers should keep in mind that because some individuals or demographic groups may face greater barriers to receiving a COVID-19 vaccination than others, some employees may be more likely to be negatively impacted by a vaccination requirement. And I got this from health.com, and they added, it's unlawful for vaccination requirements to treat employees differently based on disability, race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, sexual orientation and gender identity, national origin, age, or genetic information, unless there is a legitimate non-discriminatory reason. All right. So, bear that in mind. If you're at work, your boss says you have to get a vaccine. If you're opposed to it, then you need to go to your family and have a discussion about all those things I just mentioned. You need to go and talk to your doctor, your psychiatrist, your priest, your pastor, and just ask them about it and say, is there a reason that I should refuse? Now, what if you happen to refuse? The EEOC states federal anti-discrimination laws allow employers to require all employees who physically enter the workplace be vaccinated for COVID-19. And although these cases are working their ways through the court, there's no sympathy from the judges. And I think the reason for that is because in the beginning, everybody was so scared. And so there's no sympathy left over for COVID people, COVID cases. Now, locally, a New Mexico federal judge declined to halt COVID-19 vaccination rules for firefighters, officers at detention centers, and other workers in Doña Ana County, New Mexico, while an appeal is pending. As mandatory COVID-19 vaccines become the norm, companies are addressing the issue of what they can do when workers refuse. Many employees are being terminated across the United States for insubordination. Now, in a right-to-work state like Texas, this would be easier. Now, other bosses are demanding employees, if they don't want to get the vaccine, will submit to weekly testing and take other safety precautions, which, of course, you realize has to be a mask. Now, here's another thing I'd like to do an article on. The masks. They are generally ineffective, so they're a psychological barrier, or they're a psychological crutch. And it's ridiculous to force people to wear them if they don't work. Now, regarding reasonable accommodations, we can say this. The EEOC site has explained that the EEOC enforces workplace anti-discrimination laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and Rehabilitation Act, which includes the requirement for reasonable accommodation and non-discrimination based on disability, and rules about employer medical examinations and inquiries. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, national origin. I already read this. Age discrimination. So, reasonable accommodation says to me that if you can't take a vaccine, they need to let you work from home or in a remote location or something like that. So, anyway, those are your rights right now. I know people that are in the federal government that are nervous about the feds forcing everybody to go get these vaccinations. So hang in there. I'm going to do some more articles on this, and trust me, if you're an anti-vaxxer, I'm not laughing at you. I'm sure I have things to learn from people that are in the opposition. And there's a lot of bright people out there that just don't buy the story. But in conclusion, there's 1% of COVID cases result in death. That's no reason to have national shutdowns. We know that shutdowns don't work, and they cause other problems: drug addiction, depression, suicide. As a matter of fact, they say that more people are killed by the shutdowns than COVID when these things happen. And I don't trust Biden. I don't trust his vice president. I don't trust Nancy Pelosi or Schumer. I think they're all corrupt, and they're all trying to use the vaccine. And that's why they came in and said that businesses can force their employees to take the vaccine, even though we know that there was a break in the action, and the Delta variant is easier to get but harder to die from. Anyway, I'm supporting getting away from the shutdowns and just not doing things like large groups of people when there's an outbreak, because I do know that's the one thing I've noticed where people get sick. But anyway, you hang in there. It's been great hanging out with you. Please subscribe. Please give me a thumbs up on this. Leave some comments if you like, if you think I'm wrong or if you think I'm right. And remember that there's always more people out there that agree with you than you realize. It's just a matter of getting in touch with them. And things are coming to a head. There is going to be something happen. And I'm not talking about a civil war. I'm not talking about a coup or anything. But I think people are so fed up with the government and the lying and the misuse, the overspending and the open borders and everything. There's going to be a massive whiplash effect at the box office, at the voting booth. All right, now here's your weird news for you. Hyenas, that's right, striped hyenas, have been using lava caverns in Saudi Arabia to store their kills for thousands of years, creating a massive pile of bones that includes horses and even humans. Now, there is a lava tube of Jersan, and it's a pretty long lava tube, and these striped hyenas have been staying in there for thousands of years. And so for some reason, or maybe just because they were hungry, they drug all of their remains back in there to probably protect themselves while they're eating. And there's giant piles of bones back there. Now, these same hyenas are known for rummaging through human graves for meat, which is where the skulls came from, interestingly enough. And the experts were saying that a feasting ground for striped hyenas that has been used for these 7,000 years. And the striped hyenas bone pile includes 40 different species: horses, donkeys, camels, goats, gazelles, and even other hyenas, and like we said, 3 human skulls that they got from grave robbing. And you need to look this up. The piles of bones are amazing. So, and it's just jaw-dropping when you look at this. The lava tube was discovered in 2007, but the researchers said they heard growling from inside and refused to travel deep into the cavern. However, the Saudi Geological Survey, King Saud University, and German Max Planck Institute had volunteers who braved the windy cavern until they came upon the chamber of bones. Quote, bones mostly representing carnivore accumulations found throughout, particularly concentrated in the very western part of the system, says Matthew Stewart. And remains indicate the presence of wolves, foxes, hyenas, rock doves, bats, sheep or goats, swifts, and growling heard during exploration. Says that they're still using this as a den for carnivores. And 1,917 bones and teeth were collected from the tens of thousands of bones inside, just a little smattering. 42% of the bone had evidence for carnivore processing, including gnaw marks, gastric stretching, and rounding from licking. Gnaw marks take the form of tooth pits. And the hyenas would have transported the entire bodies of small animals into the caves. With the larger ones, they would have ripped pieces off and then brought them back in there. And so anyway, get online and take a look at it. It's pretty amazing. All right, folks, thank you for tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later. Hit the subscribe and the give me a thumbs up on this, and let's get these podcasts moving. Thank you. Kelly O'Connell, Knockout Radio. Ciao.